Very good morning to you, and welcome back to Bible Break, our 15 minutes each week in the Bible. And we're halfway through Genesis chapter 18. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. We're at verse 16 actually. Hopefully, my glasses will hold up. They're broken. Um, Genesis chapter 18. Reading from verse 16 to verse 33, the end of the chapter, from the NIV as usual. When the men got up to leave, these are the same men or angels, I take them to be, because they are messengers from God. And they've brought good news that in a year's time, Sarah's going to have the promised son. She will give birth to the promised son. But now these God is now deciding whether he's going to share the bad news with Abraham, where these messengers are going to communicate, we're going to pass on the bad news to Abraham concerning the cities of the plain, where his nephew Lot, who he's already had to go out and rescue, you remember, but his nephew Lot is still there. He's still living there, of course. So anyway, that's where we are. When the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abram walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abram what I am about to do? Abram will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abram remained standing before the Lord. Then Abram approached him and said, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right?" The Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Then Abram spoke up again. "Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city because of those 5 people? If I find 45 there," he said, "I will not destroy it." Once again, he spoke to him. What if only 40? I found that, excuse me, frog in the throat here. What if only 40 are found there? He said, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there?" He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." Abram said, "Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there?" He said, "For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there?" He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." When the Lord had finished speaking with Abram, he left, and Abram returned home. Well, interesting prayer, isn't it? Abram takes to praying. He doesn't mention him by name, but I take it that very much the forefront of his mind will be his nephew, Lot. And in the hope that Lot has not gone the way of the whole world, Abram is thinking of him and his family, I would have thought, first and foremost. And so he in prayer, he embarks upon this discussion with God in the second half or second 2/3 of our reading, trying to, in the manner that you might see in any market, I suppose, around the world, he tries to knock down the price. At least that's what it looks like. He even on the second go mentions the small figure of the 5 subtracted from the 50. So will you, for the sake of those 5, Lord, will you destroy the city? But God replies, no, not even if there are 45 found there. You haven't fooled me with this thing about the 5. It's the 45 and then the 30 and the 20 and so on and so forth. So it really does look like a kind of, almost like a bartering thing. However, when it comes to the crunch, to put it mildly, you would have to say that Abram drives a very hard bargain, if there is a bargain to be driven. Because it is clear from what God says to Abram that what matters to God is not whether there are 6 million righteous or whether there are 6. Statistics are not the ultimate judge and should not be taken, as they generally are, of course, in our society, taken to be the ultimate judge of content, the ultimate judge of value. No, there is a lot more to like, certainly in the spiritual world, there is a lot more to consider than that which would be purely of a statistical, quantifiable nature. And it's quite clear that what matters to God, since he goes along with Abram's prayer, what matters to God is who the righteous are and what they are getting up to, how they are living, what they are doing. That is what is our value. And so much so that it's God himself who at the outset here, after the first, the 50 people that Abram mentions, God says that for those 50, if those 50 righteous can be found, I will spare the whole place for their sake. So right here, in the middle of the book of Genesis, and long before we get to the New Testament and our Lord Jesus Christ and the meaning of the cross, long before we get there, here and then thereafter, throughout the Old and the New Testaments, there is clearly this notion, this something in the heart and the mind and the will of God, which allows the righteousness and the goodness, the justice of the few, even of the few, to be attributed to or imputed to the entire city, so that God will stay the hand of judgment, he will stay the hand of execution for the sake of the righteous. They are the minority, but even though they are statistically null and void, it is for their sake that God will not intervene in judgment, but that God will stay in his mercy, in his patience. God will stay his hand of judgment, of execution, for their sake, if they can be found. If they can be found. That is what preceded the prayer. I'll go down and have a look, and if not, I will know. He doesn't want to judge. He wants to find that things are not as he has been told, as we see in the first part of our reading, And if there are just a few righteous, never mind the statistics, they are what matters. They are what counts. So, in that sense, the number or the degree in terms of the population is not the significant thing. On the other hand, in terms of the reason for the cry coming to God and for judgment being inevitable, that judgment will inevitably be visited upon these cities, that is very much a question of degree. And this is something which we as Christians especially, well, everybody, but we who are Christians especially should take note of. Because it is true that in order to avoid misunderstanding, to avoid presumption on ours or anybody else's part, we insist upon the fact generally that before a holy, righteous, just God, the same God who has revealed himself to Abram, who has told Abram to walk in a manner worthy of him and to teach justice and righteousness to his household and to his children, we rightly insist upon the fact that before this morally holy, faultless God, such as he has revealed himself to be, even though we might not sense it or feel it as we should at all times, that is the biblical revelation, that God is holy, morally different, morally other to us, even though he calls us to walk in a just fashion, in justice and righteousness ourselves. So, before this God, there is no such thing as little sin or a little sin. And we should be wary of thinking that that we are somehow something because we compare ourselves with those who we think are bad or are awful, or we see sinful and wicked in the way that they're living and behaving, and so we say, well, I'm not so bad myself. If there is sin in me, it's only a little bit. Well, we rightly insist that a little bit is enough to exclude us from the presence of a holy, righteous, just God. That being so, it is important to come back and keep coming back to the Bible, because even though we ourselves might be rightly wary of this notion of degrees of righteousness or degrees of sin, the Bible, God himself, as noted in the Bible, speaks about it, takes it into consideration. That is truly the point of the 20th verse. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous. Now, just because we rightly consider that the bar is as high as it possibly can be, and that there is no such thing as a little sin, we should not let that sort of cloud our judgment, and the fact that because there is no such thing as a little sin, that there is no such thing either as a big sin or a great sin by degree, because that is clearly what God is talking about. You will recall that in a previous reading that we did, it was that in years to come, Joshua and the Israelites would not invade the promised land until the sin of the Ammonites was at its term. There is a point in this world, in this life, without speaking of the world and the life to come. In this life, there is a point beyond which the Lord will not tolerate. And Sodom and Gomorrah, it appears, have reached that point. So in order to have a just and a right and a true view of things, whilst we should be wary of presumption and the notion that there could be such a thing as a little sin, we need to also realize, in order to be able to, examine ourselves, assess how things are going in our world and in society justly, we have to maintain this question of degree. Sin is grievous, but there is such a thing, we are told here, as sin which is so grievous that even in this life it calls down and will call down the judgment of God. Okay, I'll leave you with those, with that teaching from our reading, and have a good one. I'll see you next time.